What is the perfect container size for growing peppers? That's the topic of this video, and in it I want to share some useful tips about various sizes and types of containers that I've learned from growing peppers for over 10 years. I'll start at the seedling stage and discuss some of the best containers for planting your seeds, and move all the way up to the final container size and how that affects the growth of your peppers. Finally, I'll touch on the different types of containers that are available and the pros and cons of each. But before I get into the details, if you happen to come here for a quick answer, what is the best container size for growing peppers? Well, we've always recommended at least 5 gallons. That's going to be able to support most pepper varieties, but between 5 and 10, these are 5 and 10 gallon grow bags, this is a great range for growing pretty much any type of pepper plant. Stick around to learn why you might want to go smaller than 5 gallons in some cases, and in other cases where you might want to go way bigger than 10 gallons. So let's start at the seedling stage. What is the best container size for planting your pepper seeds? This will vary based on how many plants you're growing and ultimately how much space you have indoors for your seedlings to get started. For example, we're growing over 60 pepper plants this year, and we start most of ours in these 6-cell trays. You'll see these at nurseries and garden centers, and they're great for starting a large number of plants in a relatively small space. These are super easy to use. It's easy to pop out the seedlings when they're ready to be transplanted into larger containers. You don't have to cover a huge area of space with your grow lights because all of your plants are concentrated in a small space. If you're just growing a handful of pepper plants, I highly recommend just planting in a larger container. You'll cut out the need to transplant your smaller seedlings into larger pots. Something like these 2-inch nursery pots are great, or if you want to step up a little bit larger, these 3.3-inch pots are perfect. A standard 1020 tray fits 18 of these perfectly, so you can move them around your growing space indoors with ease. I'd say the cutoff for me personally would be planting in something around a 5-inch container like these pots here, because if you plant a seed in a container this big, unless you're just growing one plant or maybe two, you're going to take up a ton of space indoors while your seedlings are getting started, and seedlings grow really slowly. So your plant is going to be stuck in this huge container while it's an inch tall for a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, you'll be watering a large body of soil that doesn't have any roots in it to use that water. But mostly it's just a matter of saving space. So again, if you're growing a lot of plants, you can plant in smaller containers to save space early on. If you're just growing a handful, you can size up to something a bit larger. One more quick thing on seed starting. A lot of people ask us, why not just direct sow your seeds directly in the garden? If you live in a warmer climate, this may seem like a good idea, but I don't recommend it for anyone, even if you live in the tropics where you get no freezing weather, because these young plants grow very slowly, like I said. They're very vulnerable to pests. For example, a single slug could come along and eat your entire pepper seedling while it's really young and your entire plant has gone to waste. It's much safer to plant your pepper seeds indoors and let them grow for at least 4 or 5 weeks before transplanting them out. Speaking of transplanting, of course, at some point your seedlings are going to outgrow these small seed cells and they'll need to go into a larger body of soil. So what is the best container size to transplant into at this stage? I've always been partial to 3-inch pots because again, 18 of them can fit in a standard 1020 tray. That's a lot of plants for a relatively small space. It makes it easy to transport them and rotate them under your grow lights. Bring a lot of plants in and outdoors when it comes time to harden off. But again, if you're growing fewer plants, you can transplant them into something larger like a 5-inch pot. That will allow the plants to grow a larger root system and should help the plants get a bit more of a head start going into the spring. Before I get to the biggest question that we get asked about container size for peppers, this video is sponsored by Bootstrap Farmer. We've used their seed starting cells and trays and grow bags for 5+ years now, and nothing has gone to waste in all that time. Everything they make is just built to last. It's extremely durable and made for a lifetime of use rather than a single season. The seed cells make it really easy to transplant your peppers by popping them out from the bottom. And then these relatively new 3.3-inch pots are perfect for transplanting up and moving out into the garden. They also have high quality grow bags ranging from 2 gallons all the way up to 200 gallons. Yes, you heard me right. 200-gallon grow bags are available if you want to get a little bit crazy with your pepper grow. But just take a look at this gorgeous pepper plant we grew in one of Bootstrap Farmer's 7-gallon grow bags. They definitely do a great job at growing plants. Plus, by using these products, we're supporting a small family-owned business. Check out everything they have at bootstrapfarmer.com. So on to the most common question we get asked, which is, what is the best final pot size for growing peppers? My general advice is to go somewhere between 5 and 10 gallons, but there are reasons you might want to go below or well above that. But a container with a 5 to 10 gallon capacity is going to be enough to support almost any pepper variety. The most important thing to understand is a larger container generally means a larger plant. So if you're looking to grow the largest possible plants, then go with a larger container. Look for something 10 gallons, maybe 15, 20 gallons if you want to try to maximize yield. But if you're growing something like a super hot, maybe you don't want a huge harvest of Carolina Reapers, which will be difficult to use and give away to your friends and family, then maybe you want to grow in a smaller pot like this one here, which is somewhere around 1.5 gallons. Your plant will still grow and produce peppers, but you'll get fewer of them. The plant overall will be smaller and more manageable. So let me run through some of the more common pepper varieties and what size container I would recommend, starting with jalapenos. I definitely recommend going a bit larger with jalapenos since they're so versatile and useful. A 10-gallon grow bag like this one here is perfect. For bell peppers, you definitely do want to go a bit larger. I think, again, 10 gallons is a good option, maybe even up to 15. Anything beyond that, and you'll probably just be wasting soil space because you're not going to get a huge harvest of bell peppers. Those plants just typically don't produce more than a handful of peppers at a time. But by giving them enough soil space, you'll make sure that there are enough nutrients to support a large harvest of bells. Habaneros and super hots can become huge plants if you grow them in large enough containers. But again, I recommend going with a smaller container unless you really have a good use for them. Maybe you're making a huge batch of hot sauce, or you know someone who likes to make hot sauce or likes really spicy food. Growing these plants in huge containers can take up a huge amount of space and resources, all for a harvest that you may not end up using. With that said, it can be fun to grow a monster pepper plant, which we've done in the past. We grew in a 25-gallon container a couple of seasons ago and grew a Dorset Naga plant, which produced over 400 peppers. Some other things to keep in mind when choosing a container size: bigger plants tend to take a bit longer to reach their full mature size before they start setting fruits. So you want to make sure that you at least plant your pepper seeds early indoors and give them that head start. Or if you live in a climate with a longer growing season, that's not really something you have to worry about. Bigger pots also mean, of course, you'll be using more soil, so it can become pretty expensive when you start filling up 20, 30-gallon containers with potting mix, so it can be a good idea to find a local source of compost or make your own compost to save a lot of money. And at a certain size, containers can just become impossible to move unless you set something up in advance to move it around your growing space. 10 gallons of soil is probably the limit for moving around manually. That can be really heavy, especially when it's fully saturated. So if you are growing in a huge container, make sure you situate that where you want it to be for the entire season. And yes, you'll get larger plants in larger pots, but those larger plants will need more support to make sure that you don't end up with a lot of broken branches or even a broken main stem, which we have had happen. So set this up in advance when the plants are still small. Put a tomato cage in a container like this, or set up a manual cage around larger containers to support those large branches. Another thing to consider is the shape of the container. You can see this one comes down and tapers to a relatively small bottom, while this grow bag is straight along the sides and it has a larger footprint. I find it's much better to have a wide bottom so that your plants aren't falling over every time the wind blows. Especially later in the season when they're tall and top heavy, it can become a problem for your pepper plants to stay upright if the container is relatively small and lightweight. One other thing we get asked a lot is, can you plant multiple pepper plants in a single container? I generally don't recommend this. I would prefer to just have a single plant in a single container and just choose the size appropriately for that plant. But if you're growing in a big enough container, it definitely is possible, and we have experimented with this. We've grown up to 3 plants in a single pot, but just remember that those plants are going to be fighting for resources. Their root systems will become entangled with one another, and generally you'll end up with 3 smaller plants than if you put those separate plants in separate containers. So let's talk about the types of containers, starting with plastic. These are the cheapest. You're going to see these for $5 or $10 and going up as they get larger from there. But they do tend to become a little bit brittle as they sit out in the sun. They're cheaply made, generally speaking, and you'll get cracking over time. Next up are fabric grow bags. These are great because not only are they really lightweight and easy to move around with the handles, but they also fold down really nicely, so you can just store them away really easily after you've used them for a season and use them the following year. One thing to note is that they can dry out a bit more quickly than plastic containers because they are breathable, but that comes with a benefit as well of air pruning your plants so they don't become root bound. Last up are ceramics or terracotta pots, and these are great if you're trying to have a very classy garden. You can see that this is a beautiful container. You can reuse this for years and years to come. It's not going to break down, although they can crack, and they're really heavy, so they're much more difficult to move around. But if you want to have a permanent statement piece in your garden, ceramic's a great way to go. I'm curious to know, what size container do you typically go with when you're growing pepper plants in pots? Leave a comment down below with your favorite. I hope this video helps you choose the perfect container size for your pepper plants. Thanks so much for watching Pepper Geek. I'll see you next time.